Hello, welcome back to the MILELE readings. We are on chapter 23. In chapter 22, we experienced a storm at sea with Nathan in the cargo ship and him getting himself in a bit of trouble with Faith. Also, Hope is back from Jennies and she's woken up and she's rather in distress that she is back on Eden 2. She wished she had stayed there with Prince Adani, but Agios had left word with Ruth, a message for her. Also, Agent Mike was sent by Agios to the main warship where Keiko is and was told to tell him basically to go home because they wouldn't accomplish anything, and that led to a physical combat with Tesave, and we know who won, right? Also, we noticed that Keiko is finally wearing a suit, a pea suit, short for protective Eden 2 apparatus suit, so he hasn't any resistance now to the Eden 2 atmosphere. And also we learned that Agent Mike is not an ordinary man. That was confirmed. But we also learned something even more interesting. Agent Mike referred to Tesave as Dragon. Now remember, Dragon was that individual that appeared before the thrones of the sovereign prince and emperor, and he was contained in this bubble-like sphere called a void that contained his stench and his form that wasn't very nice. So interesting that Agent Mike has referred to Tesave as Dragon. Lots coming together, I hope, for you. All right, let's move on to chapter 23. And we are on Eden 2. She's healthy, Dr. Mark finally announced to the expectant bodies waiting around the medical center table. He hitched up his glasses with one finger. But I don't want you all in at once. 2 at a time, please. Boa stood up at the news. Ruth is already there, he said. As her nurse, she doesn't count. Dr. Mark glanced around. Why don't you go in with Anna? Hope really wants to see the baby, he said to Boa. Boa glanced around the table at Anna, who was holding a wiggly baby Moses on her lap. She smiled in agreement, then stood up, heaving the chubby infant onto one hip. She pointed to the toys left on the table. Got them, Boa said as he passed behind Justin McNeil and Bohan Batten. Afterward, I guess Justin and I will go together, Bohan announced unnecessarily. His eyes seemed unnaturally bright. Boa paused to grab the toys, the baby toys, and answered, Of course. Bohan stuttered. What I mean is, Governor Peter and Colonel Davenport will be here soon. I don't want to miss the opportunity to see her before them. Before then, Boa noticed Justin eyeing Bohan with a curious expression. Boa understood. The older man had been behaving rather strangely lately. Justin laughed, playfully thumping Bohan's upper arm. What? You think you were her dad or something? Well, no. Boa glanced back at them as he followed Dr. Mark, wondering about Bohan's increasingly high-strung and nervous behavior. Maybe it was the anti-loyals' forces on the waters. Their presence was certainly having negative repercussions on everyone, even optimists like Bohan. Upon entering Hope's clinical room, Boa could hear baby Moses' happy chortle. He's happy to see his mama, he said to no one in particular. He certainly is, Ruth agreed. She was standing at the far side of Hope's bed where a discontinued IV line dangled from its pole. She gave Boa an expectant look, which meant she was glad to see him. He returned the look, then went to stand beside Anna, who was at the adjacent side of the bed, smiling down at the joyous scene before them. Hope sat comfortably propped up with pillows, and baby Moses was half on her lap, half on her abdomen. One chubby hand held strands of her hair bundled, while the other was grabbing at her cheek. Boa tapped the part of the blanket over Hope's feet. "I can't believe you finally made it through the patch without much to tell." He deposited the toys on the bottom of the bed. "Boa," Ruth reprimanded, throwing him a warning glance. Anna was frowning. Boa sighed. The women were protecting Hope. As for Hope, her eyes were sleepy and her hair lay loosely and unkempt over the pillows, but she seemed happy. "Don't mind old Uncle Boa, my little man," Hope said to baby Moses in a childish voice. "He probably hasn't had much time with Auntie Ruth today, so he's grumpy." They rubbed noses. Anna snickered. Dr. Mark seemed surprised, then pretended not to hear. He picked up Hope's chart and headed out of the room. Ruth looked at Boa with a guarded expression. Boa sighed again. Something needed to be done about Eden 2's relationship-free zone. He returned his attention to the bed's occupants. Baby Moses was snuggling into Hope. Then he propped a thumb into his mouth and started sucking quietly. "He's due for a nap," Anna explained to Hope, "but I think he missed you and just couldn't seem to settle." Hope slowly caressed the baby's head with one hand. His hair had grown out again, now a single silky mass on his head. Her hand left his head and began moving rhythmically over the dark blue jumper he was wearing. "This outfit is so cute," she whispered. Pushing one lock behind her ear, Anna elaborated. "Laundry sent a new package this morning. They complain he's growing too quickly, but I can tell they love making new ones for him." "Of course," Hope said, smiling. "How could anyone not fall in love with him?" She nestled her cheek against baby Moses' head and closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, she looked directly at Boa. "I remember Prince Adani." Her eyes grew shiny with unshed tears. "I remember him. No matter what I've been told about him, nothing measures up to who he really is." She paused and seemed to have trouble formulating her words. Her voice started with a quiver, then grew stronger, more soulful and huskier. Chills coursed down Boa's spine. It was like someone else was speaking through her mouth. As he listened, a growing heat started replacing the chills. New scene. 15 minutes later, Boa left the medical center so that Justin and Vohan could also visit Hope. As he slowly walked through the corridor, Hope's words surfaced in his mind. These were the words we haven't heard yet. When he said it seemed like someone else was speaking through her mouth, now he's recalling these words. This is what she said. "He is beyond anyone we could ever know. He is true and pure, so lovely, so noble and admirable. No one can compare. He is fierce and powerful, much more than when he was in this world. He does everything right and his decisions are excellent. He is all goodness. We really can give all our allegiance to him." Heat that had burned in Boa's chest at her words now resurfaced with more force. He stopped walking, feeling as if he could barely catch his breath. The heat also stirred deep emotions, and a yearning filled his soul. What was it? He staggered, trying and failing to gain control. He looked around to see if anyone was noticing. Agios stood just paces ahead of him. "Come with me." New scene. There was confusion and some skepticism on the faces of the two men sitting on chairs at the side of her clinical bed. Although Hope understood, she was also perturbed at their lack in discernment and compassion. "Breathe," Dr. Janice Mizra said gently from where she stood on guard at the bedhead. Dr. Mizra had stayed with her after Ruth and Anna left, the former to take Hope's blood samples to the laboratory, and the latter to carry a sleeping baby Moses to his nursery. And she had also remained after Justin had forcibly removed Vohan from the room. How many times do I have to explain it to them? Hope wanted to ask aloud. She willed Dr. Mizra to read the exasperation in her eyes. It had been bad enough having Vohan Batten grill her again and again about her experience beyond the mist patch, to the point where Justin had to step in and literally drag the older man from the room. Now, Eden II's most powerful duo, Governor Peter and Colonel Davenport, were clearly trying to pull more information from her than she was capable of giving. Dr. Mark was casually leaning against the wall close to the doorway. Thankfully, he seemed more content to be an observer, but Hope felt he was also keeping a professional eye on her. After all, it had only been a little over 24 hours since she had awakened. Though she had no signs of illness, she had generalized lethargy that wouldn't seem to go away. Where was Agios when she needed him? You're not to tire her out, Dr. Mizra scolded firmly. How do you expect her to tell what she doesn't remember? We certainly don't want to do that, Janice, Governor Peter said. He leaned forward, adjusting himself on the chair, which was too small for his bulk. Hope, I'm just curious because you mentioned knowing that you met your family there, but can't remember seeing them. His head hung for a moment. When he looked up, his dark eyes were glistening. I think of my wife and 2 sons who didn't survive that day and wondered what it would be like to see them again. Watching Governor Peter's struggle softened Hope's heart. He wasn't a man who usually wore his emotions on his sleeves, especially with the heavy responsibility of overseeing a people who were only grudgingly accepted by the rest of the world. She smoothed the blanket over her lap, trying to find the right words. Governor Peter, I know how much you want to hear details. I know it would comfort you to understand what it's like where your family is, but I can only reiterate that I know my parents and my uncle were happy, even if I can't remember the details. Also, Agios has reminded us that death doesn't mean we cease to exist. It's not final. Those of us who belong to Prince Adani will join him in paradise, in Jennies, until the time when our bodies are made new and become one with our inner beings again. Yes, you're right, of course. It's just... Governor Peter looked upward and sighed. What I want to know is how do we get there? Asked Colonel Davenport, bringing everyone back to the purpose of the official inquiry. He was sitting ramrod straight, brow forward, eyes steely. Is there anything that can help give us more insight into the plan of Eden II? What about the Council of Nations forces out there? Dr. Mizra sighed. It seems to me she has already given the answer, Colonel, multiple times. Her Hindi accent had become more pronounced. Colonel Davenport looked like he disagreed. Dr. Mizra continued. I was there after she was brought out of the patch. The first time she accidentally crossed the barrier, she remembered nothing. And might I remind you, the reason for that was because she blacked out. Yes, but... Dr. Mizra held up a hand. No buts. It seems to me that it's only through Prince Adani that one can cross the barrier, and then no one is certain to return. I agree, Governor Peters said, in control of his emotions again. There's a reason why she can't remember. She was allowed into a place where she wasn't supposed to be yet. Exactly, Hope said, relieved. Finally, it was understood. Colonel Davenport's chair squeaked loudly as he shifted to face the governor. Yes, but what concerns me now is, what will happen when the envoy finds out that she crossed over? That is a question indeed. New scene. As Boa followed Agios's steps steadily, questions surfaced unanswered in his mind. Agios was leading him up the mountain to the high point, Hope's Hill. It was where Hope had originally lived with Agios when Agios had first rescued her from the Atlantic, where he had housed, fed, and taught her. To Boa's knowledge, Agios had never taken anyone else up there. Silently he followed, keeping up with Agios's light, unhurried steps. The late afternoon sun would soon begin to set. Would he make curfew? But why worry? No one ever included Agios in curfews. He also needed to speak with Agios about Lucas. The boy was visibly declining before everyone's eyes. He and Ruth had already explained to Lucas how he could be cured. Cree had also tried, but for some reason, Lucas continued resisting what was offered. Boa's breathing grew heavier. Spending most of his time on flat agri lands, the fishing docks, or doing desk work hadn't prepared him for a hike up the gradual slope. He raised one sleeved arm to dab at the dampness on his forehead, then almost lost his footing on the loosely graveled trail. He looked up. Agios had paused, waiting for him. "I'm not as young as I used to be," Boa managed to say as he hurried to catch up. He stopped about a meter behind Agios, breathing heavily. "That's a given, but you're not as old as you will be," Agios said, with humor in his tone and a twinkle in his eyes. He reached out and briefly touched Boa's right shoulder. Then he turned to continue up the path. An unusual surge of energy flowed into Boa. He laughed loudly for no reason at all, then followed. That's quite the touch. At the top of the hill, he stood beside Agios, looking out at the compound, at the mist patch, and at the Council of Nations forces upon the waters. The surrounding mist, though less dense than it had been 3 months ago, was darkening as the sun continued to dip. A cool breeze bathed Boa's forehead, and the waterfall's familiar rumble calmed his mind. He turned to look at Agios's profile. Serenity was the first word that came to him, then another word, brooding. "What will happen?" he asked. "Will they really stay until we give up hope?" Still looking out, Agios said, "Hope will be taken care of." He looked at Boa. "I have brought you here to tell you some things. Come, sit with me." They sat on dense tufts of grass facing each other. "I know you are anxious for Lucas. The ravages of the toxin materialize more readily on this island. The innocence of childhood no longer protects him, and he has not yet yielded to Prince Adani. He is anxious, angry, and full of hate for the wrongs done to him by his abductors. The hate is his prime hindrance, but do not worry. I will go with you tomorrow." Agios leaned forward and placed both hands on Boa's shoulders. "Boa, Micah, Sadiq, there are many difficult things that will happen hereafter, things that will make you question your loyalty. But I call you to be a leader, so you must be strong. You must be courageous. Do not falter because of what you see. Believe that all things are being worked out for good." New scene. Boa didn't know how long he'd stayed in council on the high point with Agios, but now it was almost dark, close to curfew. Agios had left him at the compound gates. The ground lights hadn't been activated yet, but the stars above were brilliant. The scent of damp earth filled his nostrils as the ground soaked up Eden 2's heavy dew. Before passing the 2 sentries and entering the compound, Boa found himself looking around. Though it was impossible for them to see him from where they were, he felt as if all eyes of the Council of Nations forces were on him. As he passed the military guards, his breathing quickened. Anxiety? Fear? Agitation? What was he sensing? Was it from himself or was it from the guards? He paused, looking back at them. They remained immobile, rifles resting against their shoulders, alert at their post. What was it? After his time with Agios, it was as if his senses had been heightened. Unnaturally so. Boa waited another moment, then shrugged and continued forward. Someone was ahead of him. It was Captain Nicholas Hunt. The compound lights suddenly flickered on, glinting off the captain's red hair. He was frowning. He's stressed, worried about something. The thought came to Boa unbidden. He looked around. Had it come from him? I need to talk to you, Captain Nick said, beckoning with one hand. Boa hastened his steps until they stood face to face. With his head lowered, Captain Nick said, Not here. We need to talk about one of your guys, Wilhelm Batten. And that leaves us at the end of chapter 23. What does Captain Nick need to talk to Boa about? We'll find out next time. I'll see you later for chapter 24. Take care.